election campaign, Labour said it wouldn't try to reverse Brexit. But it now seems that's exactly what the government is trying to do, reattaching the shackles to the body politic, which would only make British consumers poorer and British businesses more regulated.
Jacob Rees-Mogg is troublemaking again. He's scaremongering. Ultimately, news of the Brexit reset, which negotiations are going to start next month in May, news has come out that apparently the UK government is going to do something really sensible and dynamically align on EU regulations on food and agricultural products. Yippee! This is brilliant news, but it's also what they promised to do in their manifesto. They promised an SPS agreement. To get the SPS agreement, they have to align on EU regulations. And this is great news for British farming. But Jacob Rees-Mogg is desperate for us to have another Brexit war. And in fact, I was asked to go on his show last night, but I couldn't get up to London because we are busy carving right now. And I didn't have time to get on the train and go and argue with him. However, here he is in his monologue going on about absolute nonsense, although political realities at the moment with Donald Trump and with China are bringing the British people to recognise the truth themselves, that actually our best friends in the world are the people who are geographically next door to us. And we mustn't forget that the reason that the European Union even exists was because of the efforts made after the World War II. It was a peacekeeping project, and my goodness, it has been hugely successful. And it is certain that the US under Donald Trump wants to and is favouring Vladimir Putin, who wants to cause trouble in Europe because he wants to restore the old powers of the USSR. This is not in British interest for that to happen. It might be for Donald Trump. Likely that is what they want. But certainly in Britain, our interests are much better served as being part of the European Union, getting as close as possible, which is why Norway are trying to get closer to Europe, Switzerland are trying to get closer to Europe, and we all know about the threats to Greenland, therefore Denmark, with what Donald Trump is doing, as well as Canada wants to get closer to Europe. So ultimately, America is looking very isolated. It is no longer the leader of the free world. And the European Union model has every opportunity to lead the world now and step in where America has gone. So why would we not want to be part of that amazing opportunity?
Of the second referendum, who always hated Brexit, is now trying to rejoin by stealth. This time, the Labour government is seeking to restore regulatory alignment with the EU while accepting subservience to the highly political European Court of Justice as it seeks to continue the UK's role as the main subsidy payer of European farmers. Accepting jurisdiction of the ECJ would mean that we would be going back inside the EU effectively, but perhaps worse, giving rulemaking powers to foreigners and making prices higher for UK consumers. This was one of the Conservative government's red lines while negotiating Brexit, that it would never accept the jurisdiction of the ECJ, although it has to be said Rishi Sunak then sold out Northern Ireland in the Windsor Framework. This revelation follows proposals being discussed ahead of the first UK-EU summit set to take place in London in May, setting a new future for our post-Brexit relationship. This move would suggest an effort from the government to surrender our regulatory freedoms along with our fish to the EU, even though it could have a detrimental effect on negotiations with the US. Any move to regulatory alignment would damage Britain's ability to negotiate trade deals with other nations that do not follow EU processes, including the United States. Simplistically, in terms of regulation, the US has outcome standards, is the product safe, while the EU has process standards, has the method of production been followed. Adjusted for differences in reporting, this leads to similar food safety standard outcomes. And this is despite the Reverend Starmer's position that Britain doesn't need to pick sides between the special relationship between both the US and the EU. So why should we be following EU regulations on food when we're their biggest customer? They sell us more than 3 times what we buy from them. Why are we subsidising the French, the Irish and Dutch farmers at the cost of you, ladies and gentlemen, the British consumer? During the election campaign, Labour said it wouldn't try to reverse Brexit, but it now seems that's exactly what the government is trying to do, reattaching the shackles to the body politic, which would only make British consumers poorer and British businesses more regulated. For example, we would not have been able to pass emergency legislation to save British steel as fast as we did, as it would have needed EU state aid approval. It's worth reminding ourselves of the absurdity of this bloc, as the French President Emmanuel Macron said that a UK-France defence partnership for Ukraine might not happen unless France gets increased access to British fishing waters. Little Emmanuel would rather risk the Russian bear than be sensible about fish. The EU has always wanted the UK as one of its colonies, subject to its rules, and we should not fall for its wiles. Instead, we should push ahead with British freedoms, saving steel, welcoming AI, cutting tariffs, and signing free trade deals, all of which the EU prohibits.
In 1950, Europe was reeling from the devastation of World War II. Millions of Europeans had been killed on the battlefield. Hundreds of cities were in ruins. The continent urgently needed a guarantee to avoid another fatal war. French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman had a surprising idea. He said France and Germany should combine their coal and steel production, 2 industries essential for both countries. Schuman believed the joint market would make war materially impossible and serve as a stepping stone for a truly integrated and peaceful Europe.
L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup, ni dans une construction d'ensemble. Elle se fera par des réalisations concrètes, créant d'abord une solidarité de fait.
Building upon Schumann's idea, France and West Germany established the European Coal and Steel Community in April 1951. They were joined by Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. The new community removed trade barriers and set rules on cartels and mergers for the coal and steel industry. It also abolished subsidies, custom duties, and discriminatory treatment between the countries. An independent high authority was granted broad executive powers, while a common assembly comprising national lawmakers worked as a supervisory body. The scope of the coal and steel community was limited in practice, but helped introduce the innovative concept of supranationalism. This would be the foundation of the European Union we know today. Over time, the High Authority evolved into the European Commission, and the Common Assembly turned into the European Parliament. The Coal and Steel Community was officially dissolved in 2002 after its founding treaty expired. May the 9th, the day on which Schuman unveiled his historic proposal, was declared Europe Day.
Where we're at is that despite Sir Keir Starmer's best endeavours, the structuring of the Labour Party vote in particular, with reference to people's attitudes towards Brexit, is almost exactly the same now as it was 4 years ago. Yes, it is true. The Labour Party, relatively speaking, has gained ground amongst those people who voted Leave in 2016. That is true. However, one has already suggested a chunk of those people who voted Leave in 2016, who voted Conservative in 2019, who would now vote Labour, no longer believe in Brexit. They say they would vote to rejoin. So the Leave voters that Labour have got are not typical Leave voters. 1. 2, because in line with the movement of the public as a whole, which is now around 57-58% in favour of rejoining, that 10% swing in favour of being part of the EU, which has occurred amongst the public in general since 2016, is also evident amongst those people who voted for Labour in 2019. So the people who voted for Labour in 2019 are now more anti-Brexit than they were in 2019. And then, of course, the third thing is that the young people who couldn't vote in 2016, they're overwhelmingly pro-Labour and they're overwhelmingly opposed to Brexit. And indeed, if you actually look at the arithmetic of why we've got to 57 or 58, actually it has always been that second group of people who did not vote in 2016 who are absolutely fundamental to understanding why we are where we are. So therefore, as a result, you actually do the arithmetic. Labour Party's vote is about 75%, a pro-EU vote. It's down on the 82% of 2019, but it's still very heavily structured. So the point is, I'm not arguing that the Labour Party have gained anything as a result of Brexit or whatever, but the point is, I mean, the crucial point is that Labour's presumption that they could not get into an election-winning position without fundamentally changing the character of their support vis-à-vis Brexit has been demonstrated to be false.
Slump to the UK triggered by Brexit is continuing. The annual Visit Britain forecast for inbound tourism shows spending is sharply down compared with 2019. This was the last year before the COVID pandemic, and also before the UK left the European Union. The Inbound Tourism Organisation predicts a record 43.4 million visits in 2025, with spend of £33.7 billion. That will be 19% above the amount that foreign tourists spent in the last pre-COVID, pre-Brexit year, 2019. But allowing for inflation, around 9% down. One of the Brexit decisions taken by Boris Johnson's government was to ban more than 200 million European Union citizens from travel to the UK using their identity cards. European travellers can visit dozens of nations, inside and outside the EU, without passports.
World has changed since Keir Starmer wrote his manifesto, and the country accepts that when world events change, manifestos have to change with them too, and it's time for Britain to rejoin the European Union.